Hi, everyone. I want to thank you for joining us tonight at the SABR Bud Metheny chapter meeting on January 16th. We are honored to have Steve Gietschier present his book, uh, Baseball, the Mid-Century Turbulent Mid-Century Years. Um, it's a 450 plus page history lesson on baseball from the 30s through the 50s. Um, Steve, give you a little of his background. He's an archival consultant for the Sporting News. He's taught American history, sport history, and the history of culture of baseball at Midwestern universities before retiring in 2020. Prior to that, he served in several roles at the Sporting News. He's an editor of Replays, Rivalries, and Rumbles, the most iconic moments in American sports. And he is a 2023 recipient of the SABR Research's Henry Chadwick Award. So, and he's also uh, a graduate of the Ohio State University. So I was very pleased to welcome a fellow Buckeye to our meeting. So with that, I will turn it over to Steve. And Steve, would you like to take questions as we go, or do you want to wait till the end?
Why don't we wait till the end? Is that okay?
Perfect. Let's do it.
Sure. Okay. I've shared my screen. Can you see it, Drew?
I
Yeah.
can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me to speak to your group tonight. I am honored and flattered to be here. It's 11 degrees in suburban St. Louis, so I'm glad I'm inside. You know, writing a book is a work of arrogance. Imagine having a thought or an idea and then asserting that others should be so interested that you should put that thought or idea down on paper and ask other people to read it. Yet that's what authors do all the time. And we are grateful when anyone reads what we write. Let me start with a quick overview. My book, Baseball, the Turbulent Mid-Century Years, is a scholarly work exploring the history of organized baseball during the middle of the 20th century. It examines the sport on the field and off the field and places its development as both sport and business within the broader contours of American history. The book combines narrative and analysis. It pays attention to most of the seasons across more than 3 decades, while simultaneously exploring the sport's politics and economics. More broadly, this work is set against the great tumults of the 20th century, the Great War, the Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war transformations that defined the decade of the 1950s. I want to do 2 things tonight. First, I want to tell you a bit about how this book came to be. And second, I want to give you a quick overview of its contents, what it's about. Let me begin by reading one paragraph to whet your appetite for the whole thing. For a decade or so, the minor leagues prospered under the rules of 1903, at least somewhat. Leagues that had been operating outside the previous national agreement joined the fold, and new leagues sprang up across the country. In 1902, 18 minor leagues had begun play, 15 within the National Association and 3 outside its jurisdiction. Across the country and in Canada, leagues overlapped each other geographically, and club owners used colorful team nicknames to attract fans. The Jersey City Skeeters and the Newark Sailors played in the Eastern League, the Peoria Distillers in the Western League, and the Binghamton Bingos and Utica Pentups in the New York State League. The Southern Association had the Memphis Egyptians, 3I League, the Terre Haute Hottentots, the Western League, the Des Moines Midgets, and the Cotton State League, the Baton Rouge Cajuns. There were teams named for animals: bisons, broncos, bulls, colts, grizzlies, panthers, ponies, rabbits, and tigers. Birds: blackbirds, canaries, mudhens, pelicans, and redbirds. Colors: blues, browns, maroons, and reds. And occupations: brewers, clam diggers, cowboys, electricians, farmers, firemen, hustlers, Marines, millers, smoke eaters, truckers, and whalers. There were colonels in Louisville, commodores in Decatur, millionaires in Colorado Springs, orators in Bridgeport, senators in Columbus and Lansing, and volunteers in Nashville. There were convicts and crooks, saints and apostles, lunatics, cotton pickers, hill climbers, gold bugs, and gas bags. And that was just the beginning. 21 leagues opened play in 1903, 34 in 1905, and 40 in 1908. By the end of the decade, 52 leagues started the season, a total that would not be surpassed until the late 1940s. Okay, just one paragraph. And now, the origin story. From 1986 to 2008, I ran the research center at the Sporting News. Lots of SABR members, maybe including some here today, used the research services we provided. In that capacity, I was once part of a panel discussion on the future of baseball research. In other words, where the field was at that time and where it was going. During that session, I met Dorothy Seymour Mills, the widow of Dr. Harold Seymour. Together, they had published two foundational books on baseball history: Baseball, the Early Years, that takes the sport from its beginnings to 1903, when the two major leagues settled the differences between them, and Baseball, the Golden Age, that moves the story forward to about 1930. Later, they added Baseball, the People's Game, to complete the trilogy. At that session, I asked Dorothy what she would think if someone picked up the ball where she and her late husband had laid it down and wrote a solid narrative and analytical history of the game since 1930. Without hesitation, she said that was a good idea. She heartily approved. But who would write such a book? I was well connected in the scholarly baseball history and research community, and I asked many people if they were interested in such a project. Everyone turned me down, and nearly everyone said the same thing: Steve, you should do this. My first reaction was that these folks were crazy. I was not a professor. I had a full-time job and a family to raise, but I did think about it. And then one day I sat down to lunch with the late Dan Ross, then the director of the University of Nebraska Press, and together we hacked out the beginning of what became a book proposal. Once I agreed to submit a proposal, the first question was how to define the book chronologically. In other words, where to begin and where to end. The where to end question was easier to answer. I decided quickly that taking the story from where the Seymours ended to the present would be way too much. So I settled on 1960 as an end point. The reason was quite simple. 1960 was the last season in which each major league had only 8 teams. 1961, I argued, when the American League expanded to 10 teams, would be the start of a new era. But where to begin? You can't just start. You need a place and a reason. As luck would have it, I found the necrology section of the 1932 Spalding Guide called A Grim Harvest, an essay that noted the deaths of so many prominent baseball figures in 1931. Van Johnson, his successor, Ernest Bernard, George Washington Bradley, who pitched the first no-hitter in the National League, Jack Cheesebro, Jimmy McAleer, Charles Murphy, and Bonesetter Reese, an idiosyncratic physical therapist. Plus, before the year was out, Gary Herman, and Charles Comiskey and Barney Dreyfus just a few months later. So 1931 seemed to me to be a turning point, the end of something old and the start of something new. I recalled, too, one of the first adult books I read, Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August. It became my model. It opens with the funeral of King Edward VII in 1910, the last time all the crowned heads of Europe, most of them related to one another, gathered together before the start of the Great War. Tuchman set the scene with her account of this funeral, and I tried to do the same thing with the grim harvest. And with that, I had my beginning. But really, not just where to begin, but how to begin, how to do the research. I was twice blessed. The first blessing was that I presided over the Sporting News Archives, a great research library with thousands of books and thousands of brown envelopes full of newspaper clippings. The second blessing was that I gained access to the note cards that the Seymours themselves had compiled for books they did not have time to write. The Seymour collection is located at Cornell University, and I was able to go there and mine what I soon learned was a very rich collection. In addition, I had the benefit of the tremendous amount of research and publishing that SABR members had done since SABR was founded in 1971, the date of publication, incidentally, of the Seymours' second book. My book, therefore, would be a combination of narrative, that is the story of the game, and analysis, the why and the how. It would also be a combination of my own original research while incorporating the work of others, a project that academic historians call a synthesis. That's why the notes section and the bibliography are so long, some 74 pages. Does this sound a little dull? Maybe so. I kept in mind that I was trying to write for both a scholarly audience and writing for a popular audience at the same time. I recalled hearing historian David McCullough say, and I paraphrase here, history is not hurt by writing it in a way that somebody may want to read it. Mm-hmm. So I decided early on to avoid the heavy language of academia and also to avoid simply telling the story of one blasted season after another. I mean, when you think about it, baseball has no plot. There's a beginning, sure, but there's no climax, no ending. There's always next year. The solution I found was two-pronged. First, I did not proceed strictly chronologically, season by season. Instead, I identified themes, to each of which I returned again and again as appropriate. Second, I decided to concentrate on people, to find one individual for each chapter, one person whose career encapsulated certain events and themes about which I wanted to write. So that's how the book came to be. Now let me talk a bit about what it's about. Understand that I did not write a series of biographical sketches. Instead, the career of one individual winds in and out of each chapter, during which I discuss the game's history, its politics, its economics, and its relationship with the rest of American history. I wound up writing a prologue and 14 chapters. In a sense, these can be divided into three sections: the Great Depression, World War II, and the post-war years. The prologue and the first 6 chapters, which include some considerable backstory, focus on the Great Depression, and the persons profiled therein are Ernest Bernard, the second president of the American League, Connie Mack, Branch Rickey, Kennesaw Landis, Ed Barrow, and Larry McPhail. Here we look at such things as declining attendance during the Depression, downward pressure on salaries, reluctance to lower ticket prices, the contraction of the miners, the advent of radio broadcasting, battles over farm systems in the minor league draft, and various innovations like the All-Star Game, the creation of the Hall of Fame, and the establishment of numerous postseason awards. The middle section covers World War II. It homes in on Hank Greenberg, Don Barnes, and Yogi Berra. Here we see the reaction of baseball to the start of the war in Europe. FDR's Green Light Letter organized baseball's patriotic effort to contribute to the war effort while simultaneously trying to keep players on the field and spectators in the stands. The impact of the military draft, the pronounced decline in the quality of play, restrictions on spring training and travel, the change in the composition of the baseball itself, and the annual debate over whether the federal government would shut the game down entirely. The third part studies the post-war years, and its main characters are Tom Yawkey, Bill Veeck, Red Barber, Ford Frick, Henry Aaron, and Bill Shea. Here we look at returning veterans, labor relations, race, demographic change, television, and the threat of government intervention, plus safer travel by air, old, decrepit ballparks, problems signing young players more interested in attending college than playing in the minors, and the persistence of the peacetime selective service draft. It is a big book, admittedly, but I hope it is readable, and I hope it holds your attention. I hope, in short, that I have not been too arrogant. You can order the book directly from the publisher, the University of Nebraska Press, or from Amazon, or from any bookstore. If you want a signed copy, send me an email, and we can work that out. Let me conclude by reading just one more paragraph, after which I'll be glad to take questions. This is the opening paragraph of the chapter on Yogi Berra. The tiny craft were nicknamed rocket boats, but the young sailor who liked almost nothing more than reading comic books thought he heard rocket ships and volunteered. Who wouldn't want to set off in a rocket ship, even on a dangerous mission? Besides, Seaman Second Class Larry Berra was bored. Months before, just after his 18th birthday, on May 12, 1943, his hometown Selective Service Board had notified him that he would soon be drafted. Berra had just recently begun playing baseball for the Norfolk Tars in the Piedmont League, and he was concerned that his first season was about to be truncated. Shrewdly, he asked his draft board to transfer his paperwork from St. Louis to Norfolk, and the gambit worked. The papers took months to arrive in Virginia, so Berra finished the season with the Tars. During the summer, they played an exhibition game at the Norfolk Naval Air Station, home of the Navy's Atlantic Fleet. Berra spoke with the manager of the air station team, who said that if Berra enlisted, he would get assigned to the air station where he could play ball. After the season, Berra passed his physical and joined the Navy. He endured 6 weeks of basic training, but a summons from Norfolk never came. After a short trip home while his mother underwent surgery, Berra went to Little Creek, Virginia for amphibious training during the day and movies and comic books at night. That's when he encountered the rocket boats. Technically, each was an LCSS, or Landing Craft Support Small, 36 feet long, carrying a crew of 1 officer and 6 seamen, and armed with twin 50 caliber machine guns, 2 30 caliber machine guns, 48 rockets, and a dozen smoke pots for deception. I didn't think about it being dangerous, Berra told sports writer Joe Trimble years later. I was sick of hanging around all day. I wanted to be doing something. And he did, learning to fire the twin 50 caliber guns. After further training, Berra's unit boarded an LST landing ship tank bound for Boston, joined a convoy off the coast of Halifax, Nova Scotia, and sailed across the Atlantic to Glasgow, Scotland. Moving at last by train to Plymouth, England, Berra and his mates waited. Soon they knew it would be D-Day, and they would take part in the massive Allied invasion of northern France. Okay, that's it. Let me get out of the share. And here we all are. Comments, questions, observations? Paul.
I got one. Yeah. Don Barnes. Why'd you pick him?
Well, Don Barnes was an owner of the St. Louis Browns.
Yep.
And I think Don Barnes' career as an owner is kind of what the old story about people who own a boat for recreational purposes. The two happiest days of your life are the day you buy the boat and the date you sell it. And there was no question that Don Barnes was happy buying the Browns, and he was even more happy on the day he sold the Browns. Don Barnes had a great idea. He came to understand that St. Louis could not support two baseball teams. So he planned to move the Browns to the West Coast for 1942. He had people devise a schedule that would get all the other 8 American League teams to Los Angeles and back without too much difficulty. And he planned to introduce a motion to move the Browns to California, to Los Angeles, at the annual winter meetings of the American League, scheduled for Monday, December 8th, 1941. And of course, the day before, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor. Barnes' motion was brought to the floor, and even he voted against it. So he's an interesting character. He was not a baseball guy. He wanted to do something for the city of St. Louis, and then when he realized he couldn't, he wanted to go to LA 15 years before the Dodgers and Giants did. Amazing.
So a follow-up question.
Yes, sir.
How did you, I mean, that's a good narrative about him. How did you pick him, and what larger theme were you trying to talk about when you wrote?
Well, I mean, one of the themes it introduces is that baseball will have to change significantly during the war. Another theme it introduces is that the fate of teams in 2-team cities, like Boston, like New York, a 3-team city, like St. Louis, like Philadelphia, was precarious. And of course, the third theme is that America is moving from the north and the east to the south and the west. And if the major leagues continue to ignore cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, and later Houston and Phoenix, they do so at their peril. So it's kind of a sneaky way to introduce the idea of expansion, westward expansion, the expansion of the major leagues, the threat of the Continental League, and the inability of major league owners to recognize that they had to change.
Tony, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Any thoughts of doing a follow-up book starting in 61 and going from there?
Yes, I have a thought about that, and the answer is no. I am working on another book, but it will be much, much shorter.
Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I'm going to drill down on the years 1950 to 1953, and look at how baseball responded to America's forgotten war, the Korean War. You know, we don't think about the Korean War. Really, there was a memorial to the Vietnam War dead in Washington, D.C. before there was a memorial to the Korean War dead. And people, you know, the only thing people know about Korea is MASH. And MASH is really a metaphor about Vietnam. It's not much about Korea. Baseball, like the rest of American society, had to face the challenges raised by the Korean War, and those are topics that we baseball people don't really think about. You know, if you think about World War II and that poster of Uncle Sam pointing, he says, "I want you, and I want you, and I want you, and I want you, and he points at everybody. But during the Korean War, just like during Vietnam, Uncle Sam said, I want you, but you can stay home and make money. And I want you, but you can stay home and go to college. That creates all kinds of pressures, challenges, conflicts that this book will seek to examine. But it will seek to examine it in about a third the space that I took up with the big book, maybe half the space.
And it will include baseball players that
Oh,
served
yes.
in the war.
Yeah, right. It's, yes, it will be how baseball responded to the challenges of the Korean War. I mean, you think about all of the fighting that Americans have done over the last 20 years in various places around the world. How many baseball players were in the armed services during Iraq or during Afghanistan? None that I can think of. But
Right.
during Korea, people did go on active duty, including Ted Williams, and he wasn't the only one by far. And so that's just one of the things I'll be looking at. I've just started, really. It took me a while to breathe after I finished the big one.
So Steve, the book ends up being about 460 pages. And obviously before editing, it was probably larger than
It
that.
was.
So can you describe what the editing process was and how you decided what themes or topics or characters to take out of the book?
Well, yeah, that's a difficult question. I don't know if I took out any themes. I didn't cut out completely any chapters, but I cut each chapter significantly. Excuse me, let me get some water here. There's a formula for looking at words on a typewritten page and converting them to space on a printed page. Actually, there are two formulas. There's the correct formula and there's the incorrect formula. The incorrect formula was the one I used. So when I completed what I thought was the manuscript at about 330,000 words, I thought I had written a 400-page book, including, maybe not including the footnotes, maybe 400 pages with the footnotes. And when I submitted to the publisher, my contact there, Rob Taylor, said, this is an 800-page book. Oh. So we had to cut it. We had to cut it by about a third.
Wow.
Down to about 220,000 words of text, not including endnotes and bibliography. Now, you can't nickel and dime your way to 110,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
You can't take an adverb out of every sentence and get to where you need to go. You need to find whole sections of chapters, and each chapter is divided into about 8 or 9 or 10 different sections. And there were just some where I just X'd out the entire section. It's as if the people putting together a musical comedy say at a certain point during tryouts, the second act is too long. That song we've given the lead singer, gotta go. And what was a 5-minute song turns into one line of dialogue. And that's what I had to do over and over and over again. And as a result, move things from one chapter to another. I've got an office down here in my basement. We've got a big sitting room with a floor, and I laid out the whole book on the floor. You give me space, I'll use that space. And I moved things around and cut things out and got it down to where I wanted it. Then after I was finished with it, it goes to a copy editor, someone employed by the press, who reads the whole thing and hopefully has some knowledge of baseball and says, and grammar as well, and suggests all kinds of changes. We got along very, very well. She was a professional. She was really good at what she did. You look to eliminate inconsistencies, to make sure that Casey Stengel is spelled the same way and the correct way every time, and to make sure you get dates right. We screwed up a couple times on that, and you go back and forth for several months, and then the final approved manuscript gets sent to the typesetters, and they turn the typewritten page, computer-generated typewritten page into page proofs, what the actual pages will look like. And then you get one more chance to read it all and to make sure that there are no mistakes. Small mistakes can be changed. Big mistakes are a real problem. Near the end of the book, I'll tell a story out of school here. I read a sentence at the end of one paragraph with some information in it. And the start of the next paragraph was not the exact same sentence, but it had the same information. We got to do something. And the people at the press said, we cannot lay out this page or any other page completely, starting from scratch. You got to find a substitute sentence of the exact same length to plug in for one of those. And I did. Now, if anybody finds that patch, I'll give them a prize. Yeah. And Francis, it's on you. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll start looking.
Okay, great. Great. You know,
Steve,
and then before you know it, the page proofs are turned into a book with cover and dust jacket, and off we go.
Steve, I was wondering, you with all that material you had to cut when you get through with your book on the Korean War period, do you ever think about just trying to structure another article to share that information?
No, I think everything I cut deserved to be cut. You know, it was a lot of it was background, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, you know, like I said in my talk, one of the things I was able to take advantage of was all the work that other SABR members have done over the past, you know, more than 50 years. So that in 1931, when I start talking about Herbert Hoover as president of the United States going to the ballpark and attending opening day or a World Series game, there was then a long section on all the other presidents and their involvement with baseball. Gone. You'll never read it. And there will be no director's cut either.
Mhm.
So I've asked this before, I think. I don't know what kind of answer I've gotten, but what's the deal with the University of Nebraska Press and their not only willingness, but their efforts to publish baseball books? How did that come about?
Well, I don't know how it came about, but I think Dan Ross probably had something to do with it. University of Nebraska, you know, we rightly or wrongly, you know, when we think of leading American universities, we don't really think of the University of Nebraska. We think of the Harvards and Yales and Berkeleys and Dukes of the world. But in terms of academic publishing, the University of Nebraska Press is one of the largest, and I think one of the more prosperous ones. And years ago, when Dan Ross was still alive, he said to his bosses, well, he was the director of the press, but he does have a board of directors, and he does report to the president of the university. Let's expand into a scholarly work on sports and especially scholarly work on baseball. And so they did, and have continued that, even though Dan is long gone and now, unfortunately, no longer with us.
And terrific books that come out of there too.
Oh yeah, wonderful books, you know, wonderful books. Last year's Seymour Medal winner, the biography of Horace Stoneham, is the University of Nebraska Press book. Yeah. So they're my friends.
I have a follow-up question. You know, you've got access to a lot of archives that most of us will never get to. And you went through a lot of collections. What were the stuff that you said, holy cow, look at this. This is incredible. What really shocked you when you were reading it?
Boy, I think I probably said that a lot, you know. I don't think I found anything, Paul, that no one had ever found before, but I was able to bring things together, I think, at certain parts of the book in ways that other people haven't. I'm particularly happy with the stuff I wrote about Tom Yawkey. Of course, the question that comes up is, you know, was Yawkey a racist? When the three African Americans tried out for the Red Sox, was he the one who said, get those N-words off the field? Or was it somebody else, or maybe Nobody said it. And what was his attitude toward race? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer. But I explore, I mean, and there's a wonderful biography of Yawkey written by my good friend Bill Nowlin, that talks somewhat about this. But I've got kind of roots in South Carolina, and I spent a lot of time in Georgetown County, just south of Myrtle Beach, and that's where Yawkey lived. A good portion of the baseball season, and he lived on land that had once been a plantation, and he had a relationship with the descendants of people who had lived there during the 19th century and had certain attitudes about those folks that I think carried over to baseball, a kind of paternalistic attitude. And I think I've said things about Yawkey that no one else has said before, and I'm happy about that section of the book, very much so. So there's just one example. And another thing I did, I don't want to go on too long here. Another thing I did is explore a little bit of the background and the substance of the so-called green light letter. Everybody knows the story. Commissioner Landis, after Pearl Harbor, when the calendar turns from 1941 to 1942, is wondering, to what extent can we have a baseball season? And he writes a letter to the president, Franklin Roosevelt, and Roosevelt writes an answer that basically says, yes, baseball can go on. It's called the Green Light Letter. The Sporting News in February of 1942 says, we should make President Roosevelt our man of the year, even though the year is only a month and a half old. Well, there's some backstory, and maybe something that other people haven't talked about. First of all, Landis and Roosevelt hated each other, or at least Landis hated Roosevelt. Landis was a Republican. He was at one time a Teddy Roosevelt progressive Republican, but by the 1930s, he had become a conservative Republican. He was an anti-New Dealer. When he wrote the letter to the president, imagine this, basically begging the president to let baseball continue, he scribbles the note by hand in pencil. Now, I don't care who the president of the United States is. Isn't that just a little bit insulting? So Roosevelt writes back, and everybody reads the letter and says, great, we can continue to play baseball. But read the letter. In one part, Roosevelt says, yes, I want baseball to continue, but remember, each player has to fulfill his obligation to the country. So we may have the game, but who's going to be playing that game? And then additionally, Roosevelt says, oh, and by the way, since we're mobilizing for this war, and since so many people will finally be working, the Depression is coming to an end, I hope you can play more night games. And Landis did not like night games. So it's a little bit of a nudge. There's a little bit more to the Green Light Letter than most people think. So, when you spend 435 pages, you can put in details like that. And I was glad to do so. Someone else.
Well, I just want to say I started reading it your book the other day.
Thank you.
And, you're welcome. And when I saw the title and all, I'm not a huge history buff, but I am a big baseball fan. But I have found something interesting, things that I haven't known before about baseball and about the time. It's very entertaining. You did what McCullough said. You've made it interesting and erudite, if you will, and I appreciate that. I love the section about radio. And the newspaper writers who were fighting, trying to participate in radio broadcasts and couldn't, and I love the little thing about WGN, world's greatest newspaper, all that kind of stuff. It was just, there's been a discovery every page almost. It's a terrific book.
Well, Carl, thank you very much. It is a high compliment when anybody says, I bought your book I've read your book, and I like it. It's unbelievable. And Carl, you are a fan of history. Look at that cap you're wearing.
Yeah. Well, this is a cap my daughter gave me for Christmas.
All right.
She lives in Bellingham, Washington.
Oh, wow.
And it's the home of the Bellingham Bells. So that's not the Brooklyn Dodgers. So
Oh, okay. All right.
I do have one of those as well.
All right. My mistake. But there you go. All
That's
right.
okay. That they were a minor league team at one point too.
Yeah.
In fact, Ken Griffey played at one point for them as
Okay.
single A.
All
But
right.
it's one of those college leagues. But
So it is historic, just not as historic as I thought. Okay, that's good. That's
no,
great. You can't see it in the light, but I've got a Savannah Bananas cap on.
There you go.
Now that I would love to see someday, but
Me too. Yeah, those tickets are scarce as hen's teeth.
Steve, did you, during your research, did you learn something about a topic or a theme that you didn't know before going into that theme, or changed your perspective on that topic or theme?
I think you're always learning things you don't know. That's one of the reasons why we do research. And it causes you to write an extra sentence or two, or maybe even an extra paragraph, or maybe an extra 3 or 4 paragraphs. And sometimes those made the final cut, and sometimes they didn't. You find stray references. I was writing about, or at least research. I kind of research and write at the same time. It's not like you do all of the research and then you do all of the writing. It's a combination. But I was working on Hank Greenberg and working on Hank Greenberg's youth in New York, and you find out that one of his coaches in high school was a man who had been a police officer and was involved in working on the Lindbergh baby kidnapping. That's fascinating to me, and then you find out, somebody tells you, Walter Matthau, the actor, grew up in New York the same time, and and there's something in his biography about Hank Greenberg. So you read that, and George Burns, the comedian, the same thing. And so those stories are in there. You just kind of bring things together. It becomes so interesting that you say you're going to share this with other people. Some of that stuff hit the cutting room floor, but a good chunk of it is in the book, to keep the tale lively. All the stuff about Yogi Berra and rocket ships. I mean, that was, Yogi Berra is a local hero here in St. Louis. His home is now a bed and breakfast. You can come to St. Louis and stay in Yogi Berra's house. Wow. But I want to go on a rocket ship. I mean, that's something Yogi would say, isn't it? And he was, the only ball player who actually participated. I think the only one who actually participated in the landing on. He stayed on the water. He was on his ship, but he participated in the D-Day invasion. Incredible. I'm always finding things. Ernest Bernard, the subject of the prologue, completely unknown to me. Who everybody knows Ban Johnson, first president of the American League. Who's the second president of the American League? Ernest Bernard. What did people think of him? What did he do? How long did he stay in office? What would he have done if he had lived longer? Great man for baseball, but he died. He died a day different, a day after Ban Johnson. Incredible.
Was another interesting guy, I thought, too.
Yeah, just wonderful. He's working behind the scenes. He's kind of like the COO of the Cleveland team in 1908, and setting up road trips and train tickets and all that kind of stuff. And somebody says to him, they called him Barney. Barney, you got to come out to the field. Addie Joss is pitching a perfect game. Barney says, too much work to do. Can't do it. Can't leave. Dedication. Wrongly placed, but it's dedication. He missed a perfect game. So stuff like that. I mean, I was finding that like all the time. When I started work at the Sporting News in 1986, this was, I hesitate to say it, but before the internet. And we subscribed to more than 100 daily newspapers. There were stacks of newspapers everywhere. And in their so-called spare time, our editors were supposed to look through the sports section, clip relevant articles, not just in baseball, but in other sports, and then give the clippings to, quote unquote, the girl who would file them away into our clipping files. File after file, file cabinet after file cabinet of clips. And I had all of those at my disposal. You know, newspapers.com will get you there, but, you know, a whole envelope on Lou Gehrig, all there in one place. Wonderful, wonderful. So easy to access. And some clips from some newspapers that still to this day have not been digitized. So it was the research resources at my own job were unparalleled. Wonderful.
I was curious at your list of people that you used as symbolic of the themes.
Sure.
And so, can you tell me first what theme is associated with some of these guys, say Connie Mack? And was there another guy that almost made the cut?
Well, sure. You know, I mean, you can't, I don't think, talk about baseball in the first half of the 20th century without talking about Connie Mack and Branch Rickey, for that matter. Two different ways of building baseball teams, one which ultimately fails and one which ultimately succeeds and becomes the model that's still in use. You know, Mack holds the record, of course, for most games won as a manager, but he owned the team, so he didn't fire himself. You know,
Well, Mack would
the
have been
A's build
successful. He would have been successful if he had the Yankees' money.
Well,
It's
that's
just
true.
a matter. A model is successful if you have that right catalyst or that cash.
Yeah. You know, Mack and his family took the profits out of the team. They lived well. He didn't have Rupert's money. That's true. But the Mack family lived well, and the team was poor as a result. You know, he builds the early dynasty of the A's in around 1910, and he builds the second dynasty that wins the pennant in 1929, 1930, and 1931, and he manages and owns the team for another 20 years or so, and they don't come close again. And so, you know, that's kind of the Mack story, the way the A's pass from Philadelphia to Kansas City, and from the Mack family to the second owner, and then to Charlie Finley. That's part of the denouement. But I think I had to include Mack. I mean, he's just around forever as player, manager, and then co-owner, and then majority owner. One fellow who got left out was Dick Groat. I wanted to write a chapter on the 1950s, and I liked Groat as a potential main character, because not only does he play shortstop for the 1960 Pittsburgh Pirates, the last season about which I write, but he was signed by Branch Rickey, who moves from the Cardinals to the Dodgers and then to the Pirates. And so there's a certain continuity there. And I began writing that chapter and found all sorts of good stuff on Groat, and it just wasn't working. And so I cut Dick Groat and replaced him with Henry Aaron. And it works out a lot better, I think. And with Aaron, I was able to get into some things, you know, the Boston-Milwaukee situation, a lot more on race that I would have had to place in other chapters than I could do with Dick Groat, who was a white ball player. And so I was glad to make that trade. Yeah.
Well, nothing tops Jimmy Fox being the last MVP for the Athletics until Bobby Shantz.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Fox is an interesting character all by himself. Remember, his nickname was the Beast. He was 5'11", 175 pounds. In that case, I am the Beast. Reborn. but he hit the ball.
Bobby Shantz was a little smaller.
He was very much smaller. Yes, yes. Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I figured out that Babe Ruth would have been, if you put him in the modern Yankee lineup, would be below the mean in terms of height and size.
Yeah, yeah.
He would have been suitable, comparable to a shortstop
Hmm.
in today's game.
Yeah, ball players are huge. Yes. I stood next to Jordan Walker of the Cardinals just Sunday night, and I looked up at him considerably. And he's wide too. He could be a football.
You know, most of you guys probably know this already, but that thing in 1930 with the rules changes and home runs that bounced over the wall were no longer home runs, right? They were now ground rule doubles, right?
Right.
So what did that do to the home run records prior to that? I've never heard it mentioned in terms of Babe Ruth in 1927, for instance.
Babe Ruth hit no bounce home runs.
Okay.
He
I
probably
know that
lost
sounds
the-
strange, but
Yeah.
it's been documented by people who know a lot more about that than I do.
Okay.
Babe Ruth hit
rule-
no bounce home runs.
The rule that probably hurt him the most, Babe, was before they put up foul poles, it was where the ball landed.
That's
Mhm.
right.
So if he whipped one around the corner, particularly the Polo Grounds,
Yes.
which had very short corners,
Yes.
he was probably denied 20 or 30 home runs
Right.
that way.
That's correct, Paul. The ball was judged fair or foul based on where it left the umpire's sight. And if it was in foul territory, if it curved around the foul pole, then it was judged to be a foul ball. Yeah. Interesting fella, that guy, Ruth.
Yeah.
So are there any other questions for Steve? Steve, I understand that the book has been nominated for a Casey Award
Yes.
and that we'll know in March. Who's your competition?
Oh gosh. Normally I think there are 10 finalists for the Casey Award. This year there are 11 finalists, which indicates that it's either a very strong field or judges who can't make up their mind. I don't, Joe Posnanski's book, what is it? 50 Reasons Why We Love Baseball, 100 Reasons Why We Love Baseball. I'm not sure. Is I think one of the nominees. Marty Appel did a book, good friend of mine. That's another nominee. And frankly, I can't tell you the others. It's a thrill. It's a thrill just to be nominated. Yeah, I don't know. Are the nominees invited to? I know there's a dinner in suburban Cincinnati. Are the nominees invited? Maybe. No one's told me. I don't know. But
I don't know. Where else would you rather be than Cincinnati in March?
Well, that's if they're serving Cincinnati chili, I am there.
Oh, there you go. Some skyline. All right. Well, Steve, I wanted to thank you for joining us tonight and spending an hour talking about baseball and your book. Had a great time, and I'm looking forward to finishing your book and continually learning for the next 4 or 5 chapters.
Well, thank you, Drew, and thank you everybody for your time and your attention. It is, as I said before, it is a high honor.
Oh, thank you. It was
Thank you very
wonderful.
much.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Steve.
All righty.